Somewhere in America tonight, a home will be broken into. Someone's going to trust the defense of their family and safety on a handgun myth. Today, we're going to talk about what actually happens in gunfights, the hard data behind the stopping power, the honest truth about various handgun calibers, and what everybody argues about, and why it matters to your freedom, your preparedness, and your family's future.
Arise! 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 For freedom's cause, prepared and prospering for all. For freedom's light! Arise!
Welcome to Arise for Freedoms, where we learn about the things that threaten your freedoms, physical and spiritual, and transform our lives to be productive, prepared, and prosperous in a troubled world. We don't just survive. Together, we thrive.
Welcome. I'm Colonel Griffith, retired. I'm not only a retired military officer, but I'm a former judge, attorney, entrepreneur, JROTC instructor, seminary graduate, and a religious minister, and a successful father and husband. And together, we'll unite to change the world. I want to welcome you to the only show that prepares you to be free and prepared and prosper in both this world and the world to come. Friends of Freedom, today we're diving into one of the most argued topics in the preparedness world. Which caliber and which ammunition actually protect you when it matters most? Well, that's actually a very legitimate question, but people will argue it just like they do car models, Chevy versus Ford. And we've heard arguments on every car side. Well, the same thing happens in the handgun world, almost like it's religious. We're going to take a look at two of the most respected real-world study defensive shootings that I've seen, and we're going to give an honest, evidence-based answer about the AR-15. And another question that I get all the time, because I own one, is the 410 handgun. Is it a real defensive tool, or is it just a gimmick? The Rise for Freedom's four pillars, in which we try to discuss in every show, are freedoms, preparedness, increased productivity, and prosperity. In short, we try to show that freedoms help us prosper, be more productive, and prepared for this life and the life to come. In our show today, first we'll talk about what real gun data says about handgun calibers, defensive gun uses. Second, we'll try to apply what we've learned in building a rational, unafraid, and evidence-based defense plan for your family. We always wrap up every show with practical steps of what you and your family and those you know can do to survive and thrive in a troubled world. Now let's get into it. Today, the principal thing in which we're trying to talk about is after some 50 years of gun owners have argued about what gun caliber, and maybe even further than that, what gun caliber is the best, like a religion. 45 versus 9mm, a shotgun versus a handgun, stopping power versus shot placement. But two men actually went and did their homework. One is Greg Elifritz, a police tactical training officer who spent over a decade tracking real shootings and recorded exactly what happened when a person got shot with a given caliber and when they got shot in a given spot. So we're going to talk about the 38, the 9mm, the 40 caliber, the 45. All had failure rates. The lower caliber rounds, like the 22, 25, and 32, had a failure rate of roughly double that of the higher caliber rounds. So Elfritz's data also showed something that every defender needs to hear. A headshot produced immediate incapacitation, no matter what the caliber, around 75% of the time, and a torso shot about 41% of the time, and anybody that was hit in the arm or leg about 14% of the time, regardless of the caliber. In other words, where you hit somebody matters much more than what you hit them with. That kind of surprised me, to be honest with you. I always believed that the 45 and a couple of others were much more efficient. But as I read and learned, the data spoke for itself. Around the same time, a firearms trainer by the name of Claude Werner ran his own study, not only of police shootings, so his was a broader study, of ordinary Americans. He pulled 5 years of the NRA's Armed Citizen column and documented some 482 documented cases of private citizens defending themselves or their families and broke down exactly what those fights look like. In essence, though, what happened and what's been verified by him even looking at more thousands of cases after this, it all came out to be about the same. He found that the shooting distance in the vast majority of the cases was slightly, slightly further than arm's length. I did not realize that most of them was that close, and almost all of them were 20 yards or under. The average median number of shots fired was only 2. Private citizens would reload in only about a half of 1%. So in other words, in approximately every 1 out of 200 cases, there was a need to reload. Nothing more than that. 2 more numbers matter here, friends of freedom. How often does one shot actually end the fight? And how often does the fight end before any shot is fired at all? Well, let's first step into the one shot realm. Elifritz tracked this precisely. Incapacitation on the very first hit, broken out by a caliber. Here's the real breakdowns of head and torso. I'm not going to go over them all. I'll post them if you want to come in and look, or go in on the Patreon and grab it along with any of the references. But in short, the 22 one-shot stop was around 31%. Highest stop was the 40 caliber, the Smith & Wesson 40 caliber, and it was about 45% of the time. The 45 was about 39. To be honest with you, everything between the 9mm and the 45, all of them were between 39% and 45% on the first shot, stopping somebody. So even the lower calibers, the little pea shooters, if you will, stop people 31% of the time with one shot. But then as soon as you got to the torso or the head, so where you place the shot, it was almost identical, between 50 and 60%, no matter what the caliber. Now, Elifritz's own conclusion still holds. No matter which of these you carry, you can expect a little more than half of the people you shoot to go down on the first hit. And then the spread between the most common defensive calibers, there was only a handful of percentage points that really was difference between them. The caliber then is not the deciding factor. The shot placement and the willingness to fire until the threat stops. So I know a lot of the people in the prepper world, they argue for the 22, and it makes a lot of sense if you really think about it, because the bullet is so cheap. It has little to no kick. Children can be taught to use it. My wife loves to shoot 22s, but really what matters is where you hit the individual, not the caliber that you're using. A far larger, more recent data set backs this up. A 2021 National Firearms Survey, the largest survey of its kind, drawing on some 16,700 gun owners nationwide, found that 81.9% of defensive gun uses that no shot was fired at all. Breaking that figure down further, roughly about 1.7 million yearly defense uses, about 300,000 involved an actual shot that was fired. About 852,000 of those involved just the gun being shown and brandished only. So in other words, they brought it out, showed it. That was all that needed to be done, is just showing the gun. And about 518,000 of those involved neither, that simply the gun was present, and knowing that the gun was present was enough to make the threat go away. So the gun wasn't even shown. In the Werner's case, where no shots were fired, he came up with 28%. Via the National Firearms Survey, approximately 81.9% of shots were fired. I think the difference between the Werner study is because those were actual police reports, and so there was some engagement that was done. And so that's what makes sense to me. Whereas the other one was a national survey with firearm owners, that it was a wider, broader survey. So you put these studies together, though, and a clear picture forms. Most defensive gun uses, not the 20-yard, 30-round Hollywood gunfight. That's really usually not what happens. They're sudden. If they happen, they're close, often with only in an arm's reach, and often only within a few seconds, and almost never more than a couple of shots fired. So a couple of shots fired, very close, need to get them quickly. And so why does this matter? Oh, and then the other fact is that often just having the weapon makes the threat go away. So why does this matter? This matters to you because the caliber panic that drives so many buying decisions is largely a myth. I'm sorry. I'm glad if you like whatever you like. In fact, please put what you love in the comments below and respect others, but talk about what you like and why you like it. But really, the caliber is a much more of a myth than the world believes. Whether you carry a 38 and a 9mm, 40 caliber, or 45, real world data says that the difference between them is relatively small. What actually saves your life is whether you can hit what you're aiming at and whether your gun runs reliably and whether you have the will and the training to act when it's needed. So then there's one gun that, I've heard extremes on this. And it's one of the firearms I got, and quite frankly, I love it. It doesn't mean it's the best, and I'm not going to argue that. The data clearly doesn't say that, but listen, it's the 410 handgun. And for those of you who don't know, the 410 handgun, it's pretty cool with the Smith & Wesson. Anyway, the Governor and the Taurus, the Brazilian version, it has the capacity to hold 410 shotgun rounds that you can put in. It also has the ability to do 45 caliber long, which is a famous long time American history bullet. If you use a clip, you can also put 45s in there to shoot. So there's others besides the Taurus Judge and the Smith & Wesson Governor. I have the Governor. The internet loves to mock these guns, and there is some real evidence behind that criticism. When you fire a shotgun shell full of birdshot or light buckshot out of 2 or 3 inch pistol barrel, you'll lose most of the velocity of the shotgun barrel would give it. And independent testing found that the buckshot only penetrated about a few inches, well short of the FBI's recommendation of a 12 to 18 inch benchmark to stop a foe for reliable defensive purpose. But now hear me out. If you are close enough to confidently place buckshot or a slug from a judge, then you're close enough to hit with any handgun. And there are much more effective loads from which you can put within, whether it's the judge, the governor, or any other handgun. That's a fair critique if the gun is loaded with birdshot out of the box. But it isn't the whole story. And the show's job today is to promote evidence over emotion and not internet tribalism that happens with firearms. So here's what the critics usually leave out of when they speak about these dual caliber or multi-caliber platforms. Every one of them, as I said, chambers a 45 Colt, a proven century-old defensive cartridge with a long track record of reliable stops. America's Rifleman's own testing of the judge concluded that loaded properly, the platform has real defensive merit. And it also noted that the reduced penetration of shotgun shell loads, or the buckshot, is actually an asset in home and urban defense settings where overpenetration is a genuine safety concern. So in other words, if the bullet is so powerful that it goes through the wall and hits one of your own family members, that's not what you want. So that might be another purpose for having it. But this is the third thing. Modern ammunition has also closed a lot of that gap. They have what's called 410 defense loads, which fires out of a single 41 caliber bullet backed by maybe 2 lead balls. I've seen others with 5, and they're a different animal than the birdshot shell. In independent testing, that load grouped very tightly and delivered a serious terminal performance. I don't have an animal fight. I just want to tell you that it works. So that Hornady 2.5 inch critical defense load, in my book, is a load of choice for personal defense against most threats. And that's what he said, and I can see why that's said. The other thing that happens sometimes is when you get nervous or when you tend to jerk a little bit. And what will happen is if that load spreads a little bit, it actually increases your odds that you're going to hit them with at least one. So honest evidence-based answer is the 410 revolver with birdshot is a poor defensive choice. The critics are right about that. But the same gun loaded with the 45 Colt or a 410 defense round is a legitimate and versatile defensive tool, especially for someone who wants one gun that can serve multiple different purposes. It could serve as a homestead sidearm against both two-legged and four-legged threats. And even though there's some of those caliber tribalisms say never, the evidence says know your ammo and that it can absolutely do the job. In the last days, we know there will be a lot of trouble in the world in which we live. So join us if you love freedom and want to see the world prosper. Like and subscribe, receive our free newsletter, and join our free Patreon community, and receive our free preparedness materials as we promote freedom, preparedness, and prosperity across the world. Now let's get back to the show. So today we talked a little bit about both the best self-defense and prepper handguns, if you will. We talked about how the 22 has some arguments, and there's some of those people that are zealots out there about the 22. I have a 22. I have a 410. I have a rifle that I can go hunting with. So I have various things. But the truth is, for self-defense purposes, what matters most is where you place the shot and not so much the handgun in which you have. The stopping power, 31% with the 22. The others were around 13 to 17% higher. This was according to the Elifritz study, and we talked about some of those myths. Now, here's the 9, the 40, and the 45 were nearly identical. The 22, the 25, and the 32, higher failure rates, in that nothing compared to a rifle because of the velocity of the bullets coming out. In close quarters, nothing beats the 12 gauge. So civilian defense handgun uses, these myths that we discussed, the long distance, lots of rounds like they show in the movies, the caliber, all these types of things, none of them really mattered that much. What mattered most was the shot placement and the willingness to act. So that was emphasized way over caliber. So the top 6 things that are important: situational awareness, draw speed, shot placement, decision-making under stress. You'll see many times when people under stress, they start yanking. Your environment will actually narrow, and many things will happen that actually affect your ability to fire properly. That's why it's good to always have practical training and to keep calm whenever possible. Now, here's some legal realities. You got to know and understand self-defense law. You just don't go and use a firearm if you don't know what you're doing. You need to know what to say to police, because many times, even though you did the right thing, if you say the wrong thing when they first approach you, that then will be used against you when all you were trying to do is defend yourself or your home. Know when and when not to shoot, and know how to articulate a fear of death or serious harm that will justify the use. Know your state's laws, whatever those may be, and go and speak to an attorney. Learn the laws where you live. So, ammo planning and preparedness. This is another one where, especially in the prepper world, they get thousands of rounds and they have all kinds of crazy ideas. Well, usually there's an overestimated need of what they need, and it's because they have these fantasy scenarios where they're killing all these zombies and doing various things of that nature, or they're going to barter with their bullets. Well, number one, is that really what you want to be bartering with? And think of who you'd be trading with. Ammunition barter is dangerous and foolish. It puts you in a dangerous situation and it puts the spotlight on you. Then the other thing that they have is they have these fantasy scenarios where suddenly they're like Rambo or whatever it may be. Here's some real data on people. One of the top gunfighters is Wild Bill Hickok. He only had 10 kills. The top U.S. sniper here in Texas, he was a SEAL, killed 160 confirmed, and some say maybe got 255. What I'm trying to get at is for you to fantasize that you're going to be killing thousands upon thousands and all this kind of stuff. It's just not a reality. Self-defense, really, to be honest with you, if any of you have ever carried a rucksack that's loaded with bullets, it is heavy. And your typical person just can't be running around with hundreds upon hundreds of rounds. It's just not practical. It's not real. Here is what is real. 100 to 200 rounds Practice maybe 500 to 1,000 rounds. Now, hunting, I put on here 40 to 60 rounds. Now, hear me out on this. On average, people have success hunting about 41% of the time. Only about 4.9, or let's say 5% of the people actually hunt. So once again, with this preparedness scenarios, some people believe that they're going to go out and hunt and do all these types of things. Well, I imagine you would try, but can you imagine a worldwide view of people all out there hunting? There is not enough meat out there in the wild to sustain everybody in the United States or wherever you may live. So we'd go from 4.9% to maybe 100%. The danger is number one. Number two is you couldn't carry that many rounds. And number three is this. Even your top-notch hunters, or the people who go hunting at least, only about 41% of them are successful. And only 17% of them will get 2 or more deer in a given year. So if you get 2 or higher, you're in the top 17%. Good on you, right? Good on you. But most people are not going to have success, and that's within this 5%. So if you've never hunted before, what makes you think that you're going to be suddenly killing all these things and bringing in all this meat? So the typical hunter fires about 4 shots, I would say. A few to zero in. Let's give it 5 even. And 1 or 2 to make the kill. So if you take out those numbers, you really don't need more than 40 to 60 rounds to hunt. Preparedness, clearly a few thousand rounds would be more than enough. And avoid these barter fantasies that will only cause maybe danger for you. Now let's talk about America's favorite weapon. Let's get some facts on it. I love the AR-15. So does America. It's a fun weapon to shoot. But is it really the best? And my answer to that is it really depends on what you're using it for. And if you own one, I'm sure you'll love it. Here's some good things about it in the prepper world, or even just as a day-to-day thing. There's plenty of parts out there. They're made cheaply. There's a reason why this firearm was used by the U.S. military. They could produce it quickly and cheaply. It wasn't because it was the biggest, baddest gun that was out there, but it is a good gun. Now, self-defense, it is great for delivering many rounds. It was meant as a suppression weapon. It was kind of off the M16. But the thing is in many preparedness scenarios, you're not necessarily wanting to use up a lot of rounds. There may be some situations where that's needed, but as a whole, that's not what you're trying to do. Round conservation may be critical. The real effective range, when I was enlisted in the Army, they had us shoot at 375 or 400 meters out. There was 40 different targets that would pop up anywhere from 25 or 50 to 400 meters out, and we'd need to hit the closest first and then work our way out as these different things would pop up. In military effectiveness, they say 500 meters and really up to 800 meters, but in reality, most of the studies out there show that the accuracy begins to fall greatly. But why should we hold the AR-15 to any different standard than what most of the gunfights that we've seen out there? And what were those? Very, very close interactions, right? Anything over 100 meters would be very rare. So the AR-15 would be very effective. However, are there other weapons that are more effective in some other areas? And I would say yes. If you're shooting small varmints for prepper purposes, which probably will be more available than the big animals, then that round would probably ruin quite a bit of the meat. Those smaller caliber rounds would probably be better, like the 22 long. For bigger animals, actually, if you're a big-time hunter, you're not probably going out with your AR-15 unless you're hunting wild hogs or something like that. There's other weapons that can reach out and kiss the target at a much farther distance and save a lot more rounds. Finally, body armor. It can penetrate soft body armor, but it can't penetrate anything with plates or those types of things. And most of the enemies of the United States right now, the major enemies anyway, have the ability to mass produce the body armor that would stop these rounds. And so these fantasies also that they're out there and they're going to be fighting, these big major foes probably aren't reality. And it's really not the weapon that's going to defend you against a major military opponent. But that's, once again, that's fantasy. That's not reality. And how many times have you fought recently? And my answer to that would be probably never, other than the few incredible veterans that are out there that have had those circumstances. And finally, the reliability on the AR-15, it's very, very good as long as it's clean. The parts are cheap and readily available, but it also tends to jam up much easier than some other weapon systems. And anybody who's had it understands that. So, big game, there are the calibers, the .308, the .30-06, so on and so forth, are much better rounds. For the small game, the .22, and I've got them listed. So, final decision framework. What weapon should you get? Get one that's reliable, one that's controllable, one that's practical, one that's lawful, and one that you're trained at. If you get one that's reliable, that you can control, that's a good weapon. I don't care if it's an AR-15. I don't care what it is. I don't care if it's a .22. Any weapon is a good weapon when you're needing to defend yourself. And these scenarios where they're fantasizing that they're having these big gunfights, like the evidence shows, usually one shot or two shots and the fight is over. Now, use it lawfully and do those things that you need to do. Evidence always beats myth. Build your self-defense and preparedness decisions around real data, realistic expectation, practical skills, and have legal responsibility and clear judgment on anything in which you're going to do or use. The AR-15 is America's favorite rifle. For the M4 and M16, put the maximum effective range at the point of target, a single human-sized thread, at about 500 meters for a 14.5-inch barrel and about 550 to 600 meters for a 20-inch barrel. With suppression, the range extends out to, in other words, suppression. You're trying to keep them down. That was really what the big point of the AR was originally made for anyways. Get a lot of rounds downrange quickly. Maybe not a scenario that a prepper wants when they're trying to do round conservation, but it's effective 600 to 800 meters. For the defender, at realistic property or homestead distances, well within 100 yards, AR-15 is essentially a point, pull, and hit. Accuracy only becomes a real challenge for average shooters beyond 300 meters. Body armor. This is where the internet oversimplifies in both directions. A standard 5.56 round goes through soft level 3A body armor, the kind that stops most handgun rounds with no difficulty at all. But it does not reliably defeat hard rifle rated level 3 or level 4 plates. That gap is exactly why the U.S. Army has spent years fielding a new, more powerful intermediate cartridge. The Army's chief of staff put it publicly. I remember him saying that adversaries now have access to body armor that 5.56 can't be counted on to defeat anymore. Reliability. A well-built AR-15 kept clean and lubricated with quality magazine is genuinely reliable. Armorers have documented rifle rounds of 10,000 plus between major part replacements. And remember, the parts are abundant and cheap. But it directs this gas system is much more sensitive to fouling and neglect than a piston-driven design. So reliable comes with a condition attached. Clean it, lubricate it. Don't cheap out on the magazines. On the upside, the parts and gunsmithing support are cheap and abundant wherever you may go. There's a lot of knowledge on it. But like I said, if they get dirty, they have a tendency to jam up much easier than many other weapon systems that are out there. Finally, hunting. The AR-15 standard 5.56 and .223 chamber is not the traditional big game choice. It shows up in the law. Several states, including Colorado, I believe, Michigan, and Ohio, set minimum caliber or minimum energy requirements that exclude the 5.56 AR-15 for deer. While many others, including Texas, Georgia, and Pennsylvania, allow it outright. Texas says, go do it. Where it's legal and paired with a proper and expanding hunting bullet rather than the military style, it can take down a deer ethically and at a reasonable range. But it's genuinely a stronger tool for varmints, predators, and hogs than for whitetail or larger game. And I would argue there's probably other weapons that are easier to use, more effective, and don't use as many shots as what the AR-15 does at a distance. So the bottom line, it's effective at 500 meters for the average shooter, maybe around 300 meters. It can have up to 10,000 rounds and still do well. And the AR-15 is legitimate. A versatile mid-range preparedness rifle. Lightweight, modular, low recoil. There's hardly any kick. It is very easy to use for anyone. And it's easy to keep running with a little discipline. It isn't the body armor defeating wonder weapon. It isn't the best choice for big game everywhere. And some places it's not legal for big game. And it isn't maintenance free. Held to the same evidence over emotion standard as we used on the 410, it earns its popularity honestly, without needing any myths to be attached. So just a little biblical. I always like to try to throw something in the Bible there. There is some scriptural evidence that the apostles actually used weapons to help defend Jesus, just in case, even though other than Peter chopping off an ear, there was never any evidence that was ever used. But in Luke 22:36 and Luke 22:38, John 18:10, and in Matthew 26:52, where Jesus tells Peter to sheathe his weapon. And then I think in another one there was, hey, we only have 2 swords. It's very clear that they had on their minds that they needed to defend our Lord and Savior. However, we know that he had no need to defend. He could call down legions of angels, but he let them act to the best of their ability to do what they could do. Well, that's the whole episode. In one verse, friends of freedom, prudence isn't fear. Is seeing a danger clearly, understanding your tools honestly, and then preparing before you need to. So the takeaway sentence for today is your gun doesn't have to be the most powerful one in the shop. It has to be the one that you can run reliably, hit under pressure, and have loaded with ammunition that's actually proven to work. If you love freedom and want to see this world prosper, like and subscribe. Receive our free newsletter and join our community as we promote freedom, preparedness, and prosperity across the world. Now let's get back to the show. Let's apply this to what we've learned to freedom, preparedness, and our prosperity insights. Freedom, using your own defensive tool and free from marketing hype and internet pressure, is part of an exercise of your Second Amendment responsibility. Preparedness, testing your actual carry ammunition, not just trusting the box, is the difference between being prepared and being merely armed. Productivity, training regularly with the gun and the ammunition you actually carry builds skills, create calmness that will be beneficial over a lifetime. Prosperity, buying one reliable, well-understood defensive system instead of chasing every new wonder caliber saves money and multiplies peace of mind. I know so many people that be so much more prepared by having a little food, a little love, and those types of things in the household. I have nothing against the firearm, but you don't need 22 different weapons to protect yourself. But if you want to own that, feel free to. So here's your action steps. Number 1, test it. Fire at least one box, carry ammunition reliably, learn how to be accurate and know more than just what's stamped on the box. If you have a 410 revolver, make sure you load it, carry the 45 Colt or a modern purpose 410 defense round and not the birdshot. If you have an AR-15 as part of your plan, put it on a maintenance schedule, if you will. Clean it, lubricate it, and replace worn parts. It is an amazing weapon, but you've got to take care of it. Now, finally, 4th step, share what you know. Sit down with one family member this week or your gun buddy or whoever you may have and talk to them about ammunition and the facts that are actually out there. You may love whatever you carry. That is fine. But the data is clear. If you have a weapon, usually you won't need to use it. And if you have a weapon and you know how to use it effectively, that's much more important than what weapon you carry. So do you need thousands of rounds to survive? Well, myth lovers, the evidence says otherwise. A few hundred rounds of practice ammo and a couple hundred rounds of carry ammo usually covers the overwhelming majority of realistic defense needs. Skill in shot placement, not warehouse stockpiles of ammo, what the data actually says saves lives. So, closing recap. We closed today. We learned that real-world data, not the internet caliber wars, shows that most defensive calibers perform very similarly, that most defensive gun uses happen fast, close, and often without even a shot being fired, that both the 410 revolver and the AR-15 are legitimate tools when you understand their real strengths and their real limits. Not gimmicks, not magic, and not fantasies. More importantly, because we are doers of the word, your next steps are test your ammo, load your 410 right, take care of your AR-15, and train with someone that you love. Thanks for joining us today. Now arise for freedoms and go make the world a better place. Don't just survive, but properly prepare, prosper, and thrive. Good day.
Arise, arise, arise for freedom's call. For freedom's light, arise.
Today's episode drew on some 15 cited sources, including Elifritz and Werner studies, 2021 National Firearms Study, and various independent ballistic and body armor testing, and of course, Scripture. Please join us, subscribe, receive our free newsletter, join our free Patreon community, and receive the various things to help you out. Receive evidence-based freedom, preparedness, and prosperity so you can survive and thrive in a troubled world. Thanks. Good day.